There are certain passages in Paul's letters that produce completely opposite reactions from people depending on where they stand in the modern culture wars. One could say that these passages are a kind of Rorschach test for people of vastly different mindsets. Could it be that there is another way to read these difficult passages? Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Monday, May 9th, 2022. In case you haven't guessed it, today's passage contains one of those times when Paul counsels women to be subject to their husbands. For certain modern Christians, this is proof positive that God means for husbands to be masters of the home and wives to be submissive. For certain other modern Christians, it is proof positive that Paul was a misogynist, a hater of women. What I would submit is that both sides fail to understand what Paul is really saying, using his words as if they were written in the modern age and for a modern audience. But I hope if we've learned anything together, it is that when it comes to reading Paul's letters, context is everything. For those on either side of the modern culture wars, Paul's words do become a sort of Rorschach test. That is, they see in his words only what they want to see. But what if Paul had a different point in mind, one that renders our modern culture war positions simply irrelevant? Let's first listen to what Paul has to say, keeping our minds open, and then let's see if we can hear what the apostle is really saying to the church. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and never treat them harshly. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this is your acceptable duty in the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, or they may lose heart. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, not only while being watched and in order to please them, but wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. Whatever your task, put yourselves into it, as if done for the Lord and not for your masters, since you know that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You serve the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid for whatever wrong has been done, and there is no partiality. Masters, treat your slaves justly and fairly, for you know that you also have a master in heaven. Devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray for us as well, that God will open to us a door for the word, that we may declare the mystery of Christ, for which I am in prison, so that I may reveal it clearly as I should. Conduct yourselves wisely toward outsiders, making the most of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer everyone. Let me make a couple of observations here. One obvious, one a little less so, but both of which tell us something important. Observation 1. In each case here, we tend to focus on the need of one party to be subject to another, wife to husband, parent to child, slave to master. But Paul also counsels a sort of mutuality in each of these relationships that frankly would have been regarded as wildly progressive in his day. In Paul's day and age, wives were simply property. Husbands had little or no obligation to treat their wives lovingly or kindly. Children had little or no standing and could be beaten for the slightest infraction. And let's not talk about the treatment of slaves. So what Paul counsels here is a radical mutuality, though not yet in the way we would think of these things today. But Paul didn't live in the modern world. Paul was writing these words 2,000 years ago, not last week or into the modern American culture wars. Second observation. This is all set against the backdrop of Paul's teaching against other philosophical and religious schools of thought that tempted at least some of the Colossians. Why is this important? Because the empty philosophies he mentions in chapter 2 pushed people toward a life of severe asceticism, one which rendered ordinary human relationships secondary to personal spiritual growth. Wives could simply abandon family life. Husbands could demand that their personal needs get met regardless of the effect on their wives. Children could see parents as irrelevant. Slaves could abandon their posts, and slave owners abuse their slaves as mere instruments for their own self-centered purposes. So what Paul is really getting at here is a life in which others matter, because they are part of the web of relationships Christians are called to be in faithfully. No abandoning family or treating others as simply useful means to one's selfish ends. Does this mean that wives must still be subject to husbands today, or, as some erroneously say, submissive? Only if we still believe in slavery, which we don't. Paul isn't giving eternal commands here. He isn't giving eternal commands concerning the proper relationship of husband and wife, where husband is superior and wife submissive, any more than he's giving divine authorization for slavery. Instead, he's counseling mutual regard for people, even in relationships which in that day were seen as not mutual. And on the other hand, this doesn't make Paul a misogynist. Would he have written the same words today? Not likely. But what he would undoubtedly have written would have been advice to maintain mutuality and a mutual regard for one another in whatever kind of relationship we happen to be in. That's what Paul's really getting at. Now may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.